I was eating cold fries alone in my car after graduation when someone knocked on my window. It was my principal, still in his robe. I'm Harper, and I thought no one showed up for me that day. But what happened next changed everything. Have you ever felt invisible at your biggest moment? Tell me below. Graduation day was supposed to feel like a finish line you crossed with your head held high, arms wide open to whatever came next. That's how people talked about it in the announcements, at assemblies, in yearbook quotes. The beginning of the rest of your life. But sitting there in my car with the air thick around me and my gown wrinkled in the back seat, it didn't feel like anything at all. I had slipped out before the crowd hit the lobby. My shoes squeaked slightly on the linoleum of the side hallway, the way they always did when the floors were freshly mopped. I didn't stop to say goodbye to anyone. What was there to say? Congratulations? Good luck? Most of them had someone waiting with balloons and dinner plans. I had a steering wheel, a loose muffler, and a half tank of gas. The bathroom was empty. I changed out of my gown quickly, folding it the way you fold a receipt, without care, just to get it done. My cap dangled from my fingers by the tassel, spinning slowly as I walked to the car. I didn't cry. I didn't even sigh. I just felt used up. Like the year had wrung me out and no one noticed the silence that came after. My Corolla sat where I left it, 3 rows back under the broken security light that flickered every 10 seconds. I tossed the gown into the back seat where it landed among empty water bottles, a flattened backpack, and a textbook I had long stopped pretending I'd return. The fabric settled like it was tired too. The heat inside the car made everything feel slower. I cracked the windows just enough to let the stale air escape and wiped sweat from my neck. I glanced toward the gym. The lights inside were soft and golden, like a movie about better families. Cheers and laughter spilled out each time the doors opened, carried by people hugging, posing, crying. I had mailed out 3 invitations. One to my dad in Arizona, last known address from a 6-month-old envelope. One to my mom's rehab center in Oregon. She'd been moved before. She might have been moved again. And one to my brother Matt, who hadn't replied to anything I'd sent since he got promoted and decided that raising myself meant I didn't need checking on. Not even a text, not a good job or sorry I can't make it. Just static. I pulled out of the lot, drove 3 blocks, and ordered a burger and fries from the drive-through window. The high school loomed in my rearview mirror the whole time, like a reminder I couldn't quite shake. I parked right back in my old spot, the one near the trash bins and staff lot, because it felt safer there. Quieter. The burger was already cold when I unwrapped it. I took a bite anyway. The lettuce was wilted, the cheese stiff at the edges. My fingers smelled like old ketchup from the torn packet on the console. I rested my chin on the steering wheel and looked out through the windshield. Families were still gathering near the main entrance. A girl from my English class stood with her mom and 3 younger siblings. She posed with each one individually, then all together. They laughed when the littlest made a face for the camera. Inside my car, the radio stayed off. I didn't want music. I didn't want voices. I wanted stillness. But even silence can be loud when it has nowhere to land. I stared at my diploma. It was still sealed in the envelope, creased at one corner from where I'd shoved it into the seat. The school's name was embossed in shiny gold, like that made it official. Like that made it mean something. But what does a piece of paper do when no one's there to clap for it? People say you should be proud of yourself. That pride should come from inside. I tried. I really did. But pride feels different when no one's standing at the finish line, not even looking your way. I'd worked through junior and senior year, clocked warehouse shifts from 5 to midnight, took naps in the library, hid behind the vending machines when I couldn't afford lunch. I studied during my breaks, skipped dances, avoided sleepovers. I stayed quiet, got good grades, and didn't cause trouble. I did everything right. So why did it feel like I was invisible? I took another bite of the burger. It didn't taste like anything. A breeze lifted the edge of my fast food bag, crinkling the paper like it was whispering to me. The laughter outside continued, steady, rhythmic background music to a life I wasn't in. I watched a group of kids run past, their gowns flapping behind them like superhero capes. One dropped her cap and doubled back to grab it, her mom cheering her on like she'd won the lottery. I looked at my own cap. It had slid off the passenger seat and was now lying face down on the floor mat, collecting crumbs. I didn't bother picking it up. Something tightened in my throat. Not quite tears, not quite anger, just weight. The kind of heaviness that settles in your ribs and doesn't ask permission. I didn't want to be bitter. I told myself I wasn't. But it was hard not to be when everyone around you had someone, and you had a crumpled napkin and an empty back seat. I leaned my head against the window and let my eyes drift. Maybe tomorrow I'd feel something. Maybe next week. But today? It just felt like the end of something I never got to begin. And then 3 knocks, sharp, measured, right against the glass. I jerked upright, my fries spilling onto the floor. Outside my window stood Principal Harrison, still in his robes, tassel resting against his collar. He didn't smile, didn't wave, just looked at me through the smudged glass like he'd been walking through a sea of faces and somehow found mine. I froze, half-chewed bite still in my mouth. What was he doing here? Why was he looking at me? Why now? Mind if I join you? He asked, but he was already walking around the car before I could answer. I barely had time to swipe the fries off the seat and kick an empty water bottle under the passenger floor mat. My hand reached instinctively for the cap on my head, but of course, it wasn't there. Just the imprint it had left in my hair. Principal Harrison opened the door with a quiet creak and folded himself awkwardly into the seat. His ceremonial robe filled most of the space between us, the stiff collar brushing his jaw, the fabric bunched against the console. I expected him to hesitate, maybe comment on the cramped quarters. But he didn't. "Smells like salt and ketchup in here," he said mildly. "Reminds me of the teacher's lounge." I snorted, more reflex than amusement. He didn't laugh, but the corner of his mouth tugged just slightly, like he'd earned the reaction and didn't need more. We sat in silence for a beat. I kept my hands on the steering wheel, unsure what else to do with them. The bag of fries rustled between us. I was bracing myself for a lecture, something about embracing the moment or not letting loneliness define a milestone. Some well-meant string of words I'd forget by morning. Instead, he leaned his head back against the seat and said, almost conversationally, "I skipped my own graduation reception, you know." I turned to look at him. His eyes stayed on the windshield, watching the flickering security light across the lot. "My parents were in the middle of their 3rd shouting match that week," he continued. "They argued about custody during the ceremony, right there in the front row while the valedictorian gave his speech. I didn't say anything, but I didn't look away either. After I got my diploma, I went to the library. Figured it was the one place no one would follow me." He chuckled softly. The librarian pretended not to see me, slid a root beer across the desk and kept shelving books. He paused, then added, "Graduation isn't always the celebration people think it should be." A lump formed in my throat before I could stop it. I looked down at my hands. The burger wrapper was still crumpled near my knee. "You know," he said, "you weren't exactly invisible these past 4 years." My head snapped up, startled by the shift. "You think no one noticed," he went on gently, "but we did." I opened my mouth, then closed it again. What was there to say? "Ms. Reeves stayed late with you every Tuesday last fall," he said. "She never stopped talking about how quick you were with equations, even when you were clearly half asleep." I blinked. "Coach Phillips," he continued, "made sure you had access to the locker room when your apartment lost water. He told me, not because you were in trouble, just so I'd know, in case you needed more." My chest felt tight, like my ribs were a little too close together. "And the cafeteria staff?" He smiled again, softer this time. "You think extra portions were coincidence? They had a rotation system going, made sure you got them from different lines so you wouldn't feel singled out. I stared at the dashboard. The air smelled like fries and vinyl and something too human to name. Your cap and gown were paid for by an anonymous donor, he added, though I have my guesses. I tried to speak, but the words wouldn't form. Freshman year flashed in my mind. I'd been caught dozing on a bench outside the faculty lounge, my backpack half unzipped, hoodie stretched over my face to block the light. Principal Harrison had walked by. I'd expected a scolding. Instead, he dropped a granola bar on the bench and kept walking. No eye contact, no words. "You remember that granola bar?" he asked, as if reading my mind. I nodded slowly. "That was me," he said simply. "I figured if someone's sleeping at school, the least they deserve is a snack." Silence again. This time, I let it stretch. "I didn't know any of this," I finally whispered. "That's the thing," he said, his voice low. "We don't always announce we care. Doesn't mean we're not paying attention." He reached inside his robe, a little awkwardly, and pulled out a small envelope. Not fancy, just plain white, folded once, name scrawled in black pen across the front. "I was going to give this to you at the reception," he said, offering it, "but I think here works just fine." I took it with both hands. Inside was a card, handmade, colorful, filled to the margins with signatures and messages, notes from teachers I barely talked to, staff I never expected to remember me. "Proud of you. You made it. We knew you could." Tucked inside was a check, not huge but enough to cover books, maybe a few fees my partial scholarship wouldn't touch. "It's not from me," he clarified. "It's from everyone, a few bucks at a time. Quiet help for someone we believed in." I couldn't speak. My eyes burned. "Don't waste it," he added, not stern but hopeful. "I won't," I croaked. He nodded, then glanced at his watch. "Staff dinner's in about an hour. Donovan's Bistro, casual, nothing fancy." I looked at him confused. "If you want to stop by," he said, already opening the door, "I think they'd be glad to see you." He stepped out before I could answer. The door clicked shut behind him. I sat still, card in my lap, fingers trembling just enough to notice. My chest felt like someone had lifted a weight I didn't know I'd been carrying. Outside, Principal Harrison disappeared into the fading crowd, his robe trailing slightly behind him in the breeze. I looked back down at the envelope, then out toward the street. I didn't know if I'd go, but for the first time that night, I wasn't sure I'd stay in the car either. I told myself I was just going to drive past, one slow loop around the block. Maybe park for a minute, maybe not even get out. I even kept the engine running at first, like I needed a fast excuse to bolt. But then I turned off the ignition and sat there. Donovan's Bistro wasn't fancy, but it looked warm. The kind of place where the windows fogged a little from laughter and the heat of shared meals. Through the glass, I could see the backs of familiar heads, teachers out of uniform, sipping drinks, their postures softer than they ever were at school. Coach Phillips was laughing at something, hand slapping the table. Ms. Reeves had her hair down. That alone felt surreal. The smell of grilled onions drifted in from the vent near the side wall. Someone must have just opened the kitchen door. It mixed with warm bread and something vaguely garlicky. My stomach twisted, not just from hunger, but nerves. What was I doing here? I glanced down. The card from earlier still rested on the passenger seat, now weighted by my phone. I hadn't opened the messages yet. I didn't want to break the spell of whatever strange magic was holding me steady. "You don't belong there," a voice whispered. That voice again, the one that always sounded too much like my mother on a bad day, like Matt on a distracted one, like me on every night I'd convinced myself I wasn't worth inviting. "Just go home," it said. But another voice, quieter, maybe braver, spoke back. "Then why did they give you a seat?" I let my fingers trail along the fabric of my hoodie, then reached behind me for the graduation cap lying on the back seat. I held it for a moment, thumb brushing over the edge of the tassel. It still had a piece of lint clinging to it from the back of the gym where I'd sat alone. I hesitated. Then I opened the door and stepped out. The evening air met me gently, not like the slap of summer heat, but more like a nudge. I crossed the lot slowly, counting cracks in the pavement, listening to the muffled hum of conversation and silverware clinking inside. Through the window, I saw Ms. Coleman tilt her head toward the door, just as I reached it. She said something I couldn't hear, and then Ms. Reeves turned. Her eyes lit up, and before I could second-guess myself, she was already waving me in with both hands. "Harper," she called. "There you are." There you are. As if I were late for something everyone had been waiting for. The door swung open before I touched the handle. Coach Phillips held it, wearing a t-shirt that said, "History never sleeps." He grinned. "Thought you'd show up," he said. Not smug, not expectant, just certain. "I wasn't sure," I admitted. "You're here," he shrugged. "That's enough." Inside, the air was cozy and rich with scent. Tables were pulled together into one long mess of overlapping menus and half-filled water glasses. Miss Coleman moved a chair over without a word. A plate appeared in front of me within minutes. Meatloaf, mashed potatoes, green beans with slivered almonds, the kind of food that knew how to settle you from the inside out. Someone slid a ginger ale across the table, no ice. I hadn't even asked. Ms. Reeves leaned toward me with a smile. "We always sit at the corner booth," she said, like I'd been here a dozen times before. I sat, slowly, carefully, as though the chair might disappear if I moved too fast. But it didn't. I listened more than I spoke. The conversation flowed easily, stories about students mixing up answers on finals, coach losing a bet about who'd cry at graduation. "It was Ms. Chang," someone said, 2 minutes into the slideshow. They didn't ask me questions. No digging, no "where are your parents?" no "what's next?" Just laughter and shared bread and passing napkins, and the warmth, not from the heaters, not even from the food, but from the way nobody looked surprised to see me. At one point, Principal Harrison caught my eye from the far end of the table. He didn't say a word, just offered a small nod, like punctuation on everything I was starting to believe. I hadn't known what family felt like in a long time, maybe ever. But as I sipped my ginger ale and listened to Miss Reeves groan over someone's pun, I realized something I hadn't been able to name until now. It feels like being let in without having to explain why you were ever out. It feels like your name being spoken with a kind of ease, like nobody's waiting for you to prove you deserve a seat. It feels like enough. My phone buzzed on the table. I hesitated, then turned it over. A message from Matt. "Saw you in someone's photo. You look different." I stared at the words, unsure what they meant. Compliment, question, apology. Maybe all three, maybe none. I placed the phone face down again. Outside, the streetlights flickered on. Inside, someone was cutting a slice of cake and sliding it onto a napkin for me. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I had to earn it. I didn't know where to sit until Coach Phillips patted the booth cushion next to him like it had always been mine. "No pressure," he said, winking, "but this seat's been holding your spot." There was no ceremony to it, no awkward clearing of throats, no "make room for Harper." Just the unspoken welcome of someone pulling out a chair without needing to explain why you deserve it. I slid in slowly, careful not to bump the edge of the table too hard. The vinyl creaked beneath me. I folded my hands on my lap out of habit. Ms. Reeves handed me a soda with no ice, just the way I liked it. How she knew, I couldn't guess. Or maybe I could. Maybe she'd just noticed, like so many things I hadn't realized were being noticed. The table was covered in shared plates, half-eaten slices of cake, a bowl of fries everyone kept reaching for, a small dish of peppermints that no one was eating but someone had brought anyway. The napkins were mismatched. A candle flickered in the center, melted low and tilting slightly in its holder. I loved it. Ms. Coleman sat across from me, her hands folded neatly, a calm presence that didn't ask for attention but made you feel steadier just by being there. She gave me a soft nod, like a signal that I didn't have to say anything, Just be. I took a sip of the soda and let the fizz rest on my tongue a moment before swallowing. It was quiet on my end of the table, but not in a lonely way. The others were chatting casually about grading nightmares, who tripped on stage at graduation, and what flavor the mystery dessert actually was. Coach elbowed me lightly. Remember when you tried out for cross-country sophomore year? I stiffened a little. Yeah, I said cautiously. He grinned. You showed up in sneakers that looked like they'd lost a fight with a lawnmower. The table chuckled. I felt my face flush. I still remember you ran the full tryout, he said more gently now. Didn't quit, even when your socks started bleeding. Ms. Reeves leaned in. That was the same week you aced that calculus quiz everyone else bombed. I blinked. You remember that? She gave me a look. We remember more than you think. They passed a basket of bread. I tore off a piece, hands slower than usual, careful not to drop crumbs. Ms. Coleman spoke up for the first time. You submitted a poem to the district contest last year, didn't you? My eyes widened. How did you... It won 3rd place, she said simply. We framed it in the office. I always thought it sounded like someone trying to make peace with their own silence. The table grew quiet for a beat. Then Coach lifted a fork. Well, whoever wrote it, they've got guts. Takes nerve to be that honest in front of strangers. I didn't know what to say, so I smiled. Not a polite one, not the kind you wear in a school hallway, a real one, wide and awkward and true. And that's when someone slid a small paper gift bag across the table to me. It was plain brown, the kind you'd get at a drugstore with a twist of ribbon through the handles. I hesitated. Go on, Ms. Reeves said gently. I opened it and pulled out a wooden frame. Inside was a copy of my diploma, but this one had something taped to the back. A yellow post-it, handwritten in thick black marker. It read, "You are already becoming who you fought to be." My breath caught. There was nothing flashy about it. No gold foil, no fancy font, just truth. The room faded for a second. The smells, the chatter, the clink of plates, it all went quiet inside me, like someone had shut a door on years of noise. And in that hush, something let go. I laughed. Really laughed. It wasn't pretty. It snorted halfway through. It made my shoulders shake. Coach slapped the table in response, nearly knocking over the peppermints. Ms. Reeves laughed too, one hand over her mouth, eyes misty. Even Miss Coleman cracked a grin. I didn't care that I was the loudest. I didn't care if people turned their heads. It felt like something in me had cracked open, not in a painful way, but in the way a window opens after too many months shut tight. I leaned back in the booth, holding the frame against my chest, feeling the texture of the wood through the tissue paper. I looked around the table. They were still talking, still passing plates, still letting me be without asking me to prove why I should. I glanced at the flickering candle again. This time, it didn't feel like it was burning low. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out, screen lighting up the inside of my hand. A message from Matt. "Did you get the card from Dad? I think he tried." I stared at the words. Tried. Past tense. Present guilt. Or maybe hope. It was hard to say. I didn't answer. Not yet. Instead, I slipped the phone back into my pocket, looked around at the table that had never needed a reservation for me, and took another sip of my warm, flat soda. The card was still in my jacket pocket, folded once, a little smudged from my fingers. I hadn't let go of it since Donovan's. It had come home with me, sat on my nightstand, then moved to the kitchen counter, the armrest of the couch, and now here, beside me on the worn floor of my apartment. I sat cross-legged in the fading light, blinds casting narrow stripes across the carpet. The hum of evening traffic outside was faint, broken now and then by someone calling a dog or the soft slam of a neighbor's door. My apartment smelled faintly of laundry detergent and something green, earthy. The plant I kept forgetting to water, still hanging on by some miracle. The card was thicker than it looked. Layers of paper, layers of ink, layers of people. Every corner had handwriting crammed into it, as if no one wanted to leave a single inch blank. One note read, "You made it, Harper." Another simply said, "Never doubted." Some were in neat cursive, some in quick slanted scribbles. Ms. Reeves' message was tucked along the top edge. "You always saw patterns others missed." So did we. I traced the words with my finger, letting them sink in. Words I hadn't known I needed. Words that somehow weighed more than the diploma still sealed in the envelope across the room. For so long, I had convinced myself that nothing I did would matter unless someone important saw it. But the truth was, they had seen me, quietly, consistently, without applause. And I'd missed it because I was too busy looking for the people who had left. I looked over at the kitchen table, where a manila folder sat under a stack of unopened mail and a grocery store flyer, my community college packet. I'd received it weeks ago, skimmed the bolded "Congratulations" line, then buried it beneath the noise of bills and silence. I pulled it out now, dusted off the top. It felt like unlocking a drawer you'd forgotten held anything worth keeping. Inside were class descriptions, financial forms, a course catalog with bright photos of students holding books and coffee cups under trees. I flipped past those and focused on the chart. Tuition, fees, textbook estimates. I grabbed a notebook and started scribbling. Rent, groceries, bus fare, partial scholarship, teacher fund check. The numbers didn't line up perfectly. They never did. But for the first time, they didn't feel like a wall. They felt like a puzzle. One I might actually be able to solve if I let myself try. I opened my laptop, the screen flickering awake with a soft hum. My inbox had a message from Ms. Reeves waiting. She'd written the night of Donovan's, just a simple note saying she was proud and that the offer still stood if I ever wanted to talk math or books or anything in between. I hit reply. I started formal. "Dear Ms. Reeves, thank you for your continued support. I appreciate everything you and the other faculty." I stopped, deleted it all, tried again. "Hey, I'm not totally sure what I'm doing, but I think I'm ready to find out. Thank you for never looking away even when I tried to disappear. You helped me believe I might actually belong somewhere." I hovered over send for a few seconds before clicking it. There was no fanfare, no music, just the quiet click of commitment. I sat back, exhaling through my nose, my hands oddly still. The sun outside had dropped lower, shadows stretching longer across the room. I leaned over and opened the photo folder Ms. Coleman had sent earlier that day. She'd snapped a few pictures at Donovan's. Nothing posed, just quick moments. One caught me mid-laugh, head tilted back, eyes scrunched, hand near my chest like I was trying to hold the joy in place. I barely recognized myself. There was light in that girl's face, not just from the overhead bulbs, but from inside, like she'd remembered something important. I saved the image to my desktop and changed the file name from img_0745 to harperlaughing.jpg. My phone buzzed. A message from Matt. "Saw the photos. That's a good look on you." No emoji, no follow-up, just that. I didn't respond, not yet. But I didn't delete it either. I closed the laptop and looked toward the window. The blinds shifted with the breeze, letting in the last strands of sunlight. My gaze fell to the plant on the sill. A spider plant I'd bought from a clearance rack in early spring, more out of guilt than hope. I'd ignored it for weeks. No water, no sunlight, just the occasional promise of attention I never delivered. But now, somehow, it had new growth. Pale green tips curling from the base, small but defiant. I leaned closer, touching one, carefully. Still soft, still alive, and maybe, so was I. I didn't plan to stop by the school. I just slowed down when I saw it. The brick building sat in the summer haze, framed by trees heavy with green and a sky so clear it almost looked painted. The lot wasn't empty. Summer session was in full swing, but it wasn't buzzing either. Just quiet, lived in, like a place still breathing softly after the school year's crescendo had passed. I pulled into one of the visitor spots, the kind I used to avoid, too close to the front, too exposed. Today I parked without thinking twice. The engine ticked quietly after I shut it off. Through the windshield, I could see the door where I'd once slipped out alone, diploma still unopened, heart heavier than it should have been. I reached for the small stack beside me. Envelopes, not glossy, not fancy, just handwritten thank you notes. I hadn't told anyone I was doing this. There was no expectation to. It just felt right. Like closure, but not the dramatic kind. More like stitching. The kind that holds quiet things in place. As I stepped into the warm air, the scent of cut grass met me. Sharp, sweet, and unmistakably summer. A breeze lifted the edges of the envelopes in my hand. I held them tighter. The building looked the same, but I wasn't walking toward it with the same posture I used to carry. Not small, not braced, just here. The front office door opened with that familiar soft suction sound. Inside, the tiles squeaked slightly under my shoes. The air conditioning hummed from somewhere overhead. A printer whirred. The receptionist looked up and gave me a soft smile, the kind that didn't require backstory. "Dropping something off?" she asked, tilting her head. I nodded, lifting the envelopes. "Just thank you notes. For a few people." She pointed to the small gray tray on the counter. Faculty mail drop, still in Sharpie from last semester. A sticker of a smiley face had been added since I'd last seen it. I slid the envelopes into the tray, each one carrying a sentence or two. Ms. Reeves, Coach Phillips, Ms. Coleman, the night janitor who always made sure the vending machines were stocked during finals. I hadn't tried to be poetic, just honest. As I turned to leave, I saw him. Principal Harrison stood in the hallway just beyond the front doors, holding a folder, flipping through a few forms. He wore his usual button down, sleeves rolled, glasses perched low. When he looked up and saw me, he didn't say much, just a nod. A simple, steady acknowledgement. "Good to see you, Harper," he said. I stepped closer, pulling an envelope from my bag. Not a note this time, but something else. A printed photo. The one from Donovan's. The one Miss Coleman had captured just as I was laughing, hand mid-air, eyes crinkled, unposed, undeniably present. "For the wall," I said. He took it without unfolding it, tapped the top once with his fingers, a silent kind of thanks, and tucked it under his arm. That was it. No speech, no drawn-out moment, just enough. I pushed the door open again and stepped into the sunlight. The breeze had picked up, brushing against my arms. I blinked into the brightness, letting my eyes adjust slowly. And that's when I saw her. A girl, maybe 7th or 8th grade, maybe younger. Small frame, oversized backpack. She was trying to open the front entrance from the outside, both hands full with books and a water bottle, her elbow awkwardly bent around the door handle. It kept slipping. Her shoe scuffed against the concrete. I didn't rush, but I moved toward her. "Here," I said, pulling the door open gently. "I got it." She blinked up at me, startled, then murmured a quiet thanks as she passed through. Before the door swung shut, I added, "You're okay. You got this." She paused, just a second, then gave a small, uncertain smile and disappeared into the hallway. I stood there for a beat longer, hand still on the glass. Funny, I thought. My story had started with a knock on a window. Now I wasn't behind the glass, I was the one holding the door open. Back at the car, the sun had warmed the metal door handle. I climbed in slowly, settling into the familiar fabric seat. My eyes caught the rearview mirror. My graduation cap hung from it now. The tassel had started to curl slightly, swaying gently with the wind. Next to it, taped on the edge, was a post-it I'd written the night I enrolled. "You showed up." I ran my fingers along the edge of the window before rolling it down a few inches. The cicadas had grown louder. The sky stretched wide and open above me, and for once I didn't feel like someone waiting to be found. I was here, already arrived. I didn't say goodbye when I pulled out of the school parking lot. I didn't need to. Something in me had already made peace. For once, I wasn't looking for someone to wave from behind the glass. I was simply moving forward, steady and whole. Sometimes it only takes one person knocking on your window to remind you that you matter. But healing doesn't end there. It grows when we begin to notice others, to hold the door for the next kid carrying a heavy backpack and more than a few invisible burdens. We don't always get to choose the family we're born into, but we can choose the kind we build. Quiet, steady, present. If this story reminded you of a moment when someone saw you or when you showed up for someone else, I'd love to hear it. Leave a thought, share a memory, or simply sit with the warmth a little longer.